What's up, SVSers? We are back with another virtual audiophile happy hour. Welcome to this October 1st edition. And Larry, you're looking very formal. Is there a special occasion, or why'd you dress up?
I just wanted to show some love to everybody. This shirt says I know how to be formal, but I also know how to party.
So, I see that. And
is that what it shows?
Yes,
it shows me something else. I think.
It's my nicest suit.
Well, I don't know that you'll be getting invited back to any weddings with that kind of attire, but you know what? I like that you dressed up for this, and it is a special occasion because, of course, we have our first three-time guest, Mr. Ed Mullen, the legendary.
He's not a guest.
Yeah. What? He's
not here a guest to welcome anymore? Our extra special guest is a close friend of Ed's.
That's right. Well, we're going to have an extra special guest, but Ed is our formal special guest, and we're happy to have you on, Ed. This is a wealth of knowledge that you bring to the table, but we also have an extra special guest that will be talked about all evening, and I'm just going to quickly pop something up here so we have a headshot. AV receivers. We have seen the comments pouring in. There's lots of questions, lots of mysteries and secrets about AV receivers that I think people don't understand. So today we're going to dive into some of those questions that have been submitted in the past, as well as just some things that Ed and Gary and Larry have picked up along the way that should be of great use to everyone out there. So
we're going to help you make your home theater sing tonight. This is going to be fun.
And before we jump into all that, Gary, would you like to welcome everybody and say a few words, and we'll talk quickly about how everything plays out over the course of the evening.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. Well, first of all, let me welcome everyone in the SVS community. We've all four agreed, this is the highlight of our week. We are so happy to be here. But we also always want to acknowledge, we know some people may be suffering. We're in the midst of a very weird time where some people are getting sick. Some people may have even lost loved ones. Some people may be out of work. We know that. We know it's a serious time, but we also know that there couldn't be a better time to celebrate this hobby that we all love with each other and with our SVS community, because we love you guys too. So thanks for joining us. Let's have some fun for the next hour.
Absolutely. And as we do every week, we will be having 4 giveaways at random. And I have to throw quick shouts to my buddy Vince, who's part of the SVS team, who will be helping choose the winners at random and contacting you in real time to make sure we get all the details. Tonight, Larry, am I going to put you on the spot? You got your notes in front of you about what we're giving away tonight?
So I remember most of them off the top of my head. I know we've got a pair of Prime Bookshelf speakers we're going to be giving away, an SB1000 subwoofer, a Prime wireless sound base, and I want to say, if I'm correct, a PB2000 Pro.
That's right. We're going ported for the final giveaway this evening. So somebody will be bringing in some boom for their home theater to match with their AV receiver and have some fun with. Now, I know there's been a lot of binge watching, and Ed, I want to go to you first because you're our extra special guest. Not our extra, but what has been pumping through your system here the past couple weeks?
Well, we wrapped up the Umbrella Academy season 2. Really enjoyed that. Right, it's kind of right up my son's alley, and then we're also watching The Boys on Amazon Prime.
Good one.
Yeah.
Very cool, Larry. You said you've been light on the TV watching. Is there anything else you've been getting into?
Man, dude, NFL's back. So we've been doing a little bit of that on the weekend. Just been listening to music with my wife a lot. We've just been kind of sitting there and chilling and relaxing, listening to music, hanging out with the kids while they've been doing school and stuff and dealing with all that, as I'm sure most of you here are. But really the last couple of weeks just been taking it pretty easy. And I've got about halfway through Umbrella Academy, but I've already done The Boys and enjoyed them both.
Very cool.
Oh, no spoilers for Larry, right?
No, we don't do spoilers here. We never do. And Gary, I think you're spinning some new vinyl. Am I right? You have something to share with the good people?
Well, first of all, I'm running out of TV shows to watch, so I'm watching these comments because I got desperate and listened to Larry's recommendation about Cobra Kai, and that basically turned me off of TV for the foreseeable future.
Oh, that's harsh.
Oh, crap! You watch The Kissing Booth and The Kissing Booth 2?
I enjoyed the Kissing Booth movies way more than Cobra Kai, but I have a new toy that I got, which I wanted to show everybody. I got the new 4K Fire Stick. Amazon came out yesterday. So I'm kind of excited about that. It does have Dolby Atmos, Dolby Vision. That's really cool. And then Larry, I did stumble into a vinyl store. I was on a romantic weekend with my wife, and of course, when you're on those kind of romantic weekends, the first thing you think of is vinyl, right? So I bought some vinyl, and I wanted to show everybody some seriously classic rock. Does this look familiar to anyone? Sandinista,
nice.
The Clash.
Yeah.
And Tom Waits. Can you guys see it? I don't even know.
Yep.
See it?
Yeah.
Very good.
And 9 Inch Nails, The Fragile. These are all new. I didn't know you could buy these vinyls new. Another Clash, London Calling.
Sweet. A lot of reissues.
Finally, and I really was amazed at how good this sounded. Downward Spiral, also 9 Inch Nails. So I've been having some fun. I think you may remember I told everybody that we totally refurbished my Lin turntable and put a Koetsu cartridge on there, and I have been really having some fun with vinyl.
Very cool. And I have not run out of TV shows yet. I'm actually really into Lovecraft Country. I've been watching that week after week. And if you're looking for a good sort of Halloween spooky series to binge, I would definitely recommend that. As something, it's not actually done yet, but you can watch all the episodes that are out. I also watched Stephen King's 1922 with my wife, and I think she was like thinking I was going to get ideas. Yeah, it's a movie. It's based on like a mini novella that he wrote, and I won't give any spoilers, but she wasn't as big a fan as I was. But if you've seen it, you probably know what I'm talking about. And then there's a huge music.
Where do you watch that? What service is that on?
That was on Netflix.
Yeah.
Netflix.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't think it was out in theaters or anything like that. It was a novella, and I enjoyed it a lot. It was sort of a thrillery, spook fest. So I had fun with it. If you don't like rats, stay away from it. I'll just say that much as a spoiler. And there's a big actual album anniversary tomorrow, Gary, one that's near and dear to your heart. Radiohead's Kid A. Do you have any thoughts you want to share with the people about that? Turning, 20 next year, 30? I don't even know, what is it?
I actually saw, it came out, I think, in the year 2000, so 20 years. I actually saw somebody doing a shout out to Baba Booey, and I was thinking Howard Stern for the last few days has been talking about who are the 3 greatest rock and roll bands of all time. And he's always saying the Beatles are number 1, which I do agree with. Led Zeppelin is number 2, which I think I also agree with. But his number 3 is the Rolling Stones. My number 3 would be Radiohead. I think they're amazing. And Kid A, if you're not into Radiohead, Kid A is a great place to start. Really phenomenal, and we do use it as a demo because It's really well recorded.
Yeah, I think it's one of those albums that just managed to like cross genres from electronic to alternative, and it sort of brought a lot of that together. And it just sounds phenomenal. I think there's a lot of just very interesting sounds in it that make for a great demo. So that's why it's on our short and long list of demo material. And I think before we get into our extra special guest, we should probably do a giveaway. I think that's a good way to sort of kick things off. Our first prize is going to be a pair of Prime Bookshelf speakers, and we're going to choose from YouTube this time. Mr. Todd McLean, you are the winner of a pair of Prime Bookshelf speakers. Congratulations,
Yay, Todd.
Mr. Vince will be contacting you here shortly and getting your information so we can get those out to you. So the way we wanted to approach the conversation around AV receivers is sort of chronologically, what you're sort of thinking about before you even really get started with some of the deeper settings. So I thought one of the good places to start would be just the channels in the back. When you're hooking your speakers up, I think there's some confusion around, what's rear, what's side, etc. So Gary, do you want to set the table in terms of some of those connections in terms of, choosing the right ones if you have a 5.1, starting
so
there?
I think Ed and I agreed, and Larry, I think you agree as well. This is the number 1 mistake people make when setting up their home theater. Let me frame this up before we even get into this. What we want to do for the next, I think we have about 50 minutes left, 50 minutes left. We want to give you guys as much of what we've learned about how to make a home theater sound amazing using your home theater receiver. I know SVS is a speaker company, and we're known for our speakers and, of course, our subwoofers. But in making our speakers and subwoofers sound their absolute best, we have become students of the home theater receiver, AV receiver. And, I've been doing this an embarrassingly long time. So has Ed. Actually, so has Larry. And we've got a lot of tips and secrets that people don't really know about. So we thought this would be fun to share them with you. And Ed and I agreed that the number one mistake people make when setting up home theaters is they connect, if the receiver, which most do these days, have side surround and back surround connections. If your surround sound speaker is behind you, your impulse will be to connect to the back surround output. But the fact is that you must, if you only have one pair of surround sound speakers, no matter where you put them in the room, whether it's to the side or to the rear, you want to use that side surround output, because that's where the discrete 2 surround channels go in digital surround sound. Ed, Larry, you guys want to add on this?
Yeah, just only use surround back when you're migrating to a 7.1. So side
in other words,
surround,
if you already have side surround set up,
then go surround back.
You would use surround back.
Yep.
That's right.
Larry, nothing to add on there?
Oh, that's the way we set it up at all of our events too. We do the side surrounds, and then we do the elevations for height effects, and we do them at top middle typically. And we'll get into that too. Sure.
It's a super common mistake. Customers will say, why is nothing coming out of the surround channels? Well, you hooked to the wrong set of jacks in the back. So I mean,
we've even had to explain it to other SVSers, I'm embarrassed to say, right? I mean, I don't want to out anybody, not Larry, but
the newbies in the company.
Yeah. So I did see a question pop up where a gentleman has a receiver that can support 5.2.2 or a 7.1. Do we have a preference there? And Larry, I think you feel pretty strongly about what the more immersive experience is.
Me too.
Well, first of all, you're throwing all these numbers at people, and I think we got people that don't know what the numbers mean. So I think I won't answer the question because I want Larry to get a chance to answer. And Larry's actually a good student of this. But let me ask the question. Is it better to have 7? If you have 7 speakers, what would be the best way to use those 7 for the most exciting immersive experience? If you have a Dolby Atmos capable receiver, would you be better off having a classic, what's called a 7.1 system, where you would have the 3 speakers in the front, the left and right front speakers, and the front center speaker, side surround speakers, 1 pair of those, and back surround speakers? Would that be better, or would it be better to have the 3 speakers in the front, side surround speakers, and height effect speakers to take advantage of Dolby Atmos? Larry, what's your answer? Final answer, Larry.
Final answer would be, if you could do Atmos, go Atmos, and make sure that you've got the speakers that are capable of doing it. Because I tell everybody this when I talk about the elevation height effect speakers. I say flat out, it's the best thing I've done to my home theater since Blu-rays come out with better audio, is by adding that height effects experience. And if you can do it in the middle of your room or kind of on the sides as middle speakers, kind of between your front and rear speakers, the experience is fantastic. And it is a truly immersive, in the moment, in the concert, in the movie experience. And everybody loves it. And it's a ton of fun with video games, movies, music, you name it. And it completely changes what you're listening to.
Looks like everybody agrees with you. And the way I would describe it, and Ed, I want you to comment if you want to. The difference is having a 360-degree surround sound experience, but it's only on one dimension, on one vertical or one horizontal plane, versus having a truly 3-dimensional surround sound experience, because you have height effect speakers that are creating effects that are literally taking place at specific points in space, in front of you, behind you, but also above you.
Yeah, 5.1.2 hands down over a conventional 7.1. I mean, the rear surrounds do add something occasionally, but the overheads in a 5.1.2 are way more immersive and really put you in the experience a lot more. So if you have a newer AV receiver that can do Atmos, absolutely pick 5.1.2 over a conventional 7.1.
Wow, an audio topic we all have consensus on. There we go. That's a rarity, I feel like, out here in these days. So I think now that we've sort of talked about the different channels, the next thing most people do after hooking up speakers to their AV receiver is to run auto calibration. And there's sort of a set it and forget it mentality with a lot of people, where it's just done when you do that. But I think we should back up a little bit and talk about first actually doing the measurement. And Ed, I know you've probably walked through thousands of people this process. mic location, how many locations? What can you tell us about the best practices when you're doing the room calibration?
Well, it depends on the size of the room and how many rows you have, but in general, best practices is to keep the microphone fairly close to the primary listening position. Usually you take your first measurement at the sweet spot, and then maybe take a measurement to the left and then another one to the right, and try and keep it in that listening bubble, is what most manufacturers refer to. You don't want to stick the microphone in the back of the room where nobody sits, because it'll just throw off the measurements and the sound quality at the main seats.
And Larry, you've done this in some very, very challenging spaces with some of our live events. Do you have any tips you can add to even, if you're a single person doing it by yourself, anything you can throw out there?
Well, when you're doing the room calibration, making sure first and foremost that after you do it, is getting in and making the adjustments. But I think getting the optimal listening position. So like my living room is kind of wide. We have a family of 5, so we have a wide sitting area. So we start in my seat, then like Ed said, kind of move either way, but we do hit all 5 sitting positions, and then I do it one more time in my spot. So it really depends on your room. So there's no right or wrong way to go about doing it, but we recommend at least 3 spots for your room correction if you've got that capability. There are some receivers that only have single point, so do that in the master listening position or kind of right in the middle of everybody, and it will give you the best measurement. And then afterwards, I know we're going to get into this, is making adjustments after, which is key.
Can I throw a wrench in all this? I just saw a phenomenal question that I think is worth answering, because so many of our, we have this phenomenal mix of people that are very experienced with the hobby. They know their stuff, and they want really finer, granular points. But then there's folks that are just getting started, and there's a question here: what should I start with? What's the beginning? Best beginning if I don't have the money to buy that full 5.1 surround sound system? And I'm going to answer it what I think. If you only have the budget for 2 or 3 speakers, and then I'm going to open the floor up to all 3 of you guys. I personally think the first thing you should do is get a surround sound receiver that you can grow into. Get a pair of speakers, could be bookshelf speakers, and a subwoofer. If you have that, you have the beginnings of a home theater, and it's gonna sound great. And then you can always add to that. The way I would add is, and your surround sound receiver will have a way to use the 2 speakers and then have what's called a phantom center channel. So it'll sort of feed the mono signal of the center channel into the 2 speakers. So I think that will suffice in the beginning. The next thing I would add is your surround speakers, so that you can have a full surround sound experience. And then I would add the center channel speaker, and then, as we said, the height effect speakers. Does anybody want to agree, disagree with me? I don't know that some of this is a matter of personal preference.
Me personally, just get a soundbar. Kidding, guys, kidding. No,
maybe one day I'll recommend getting a soundbar, but it's not today. It's not based on what I've experienced.
No, I think you're spot on. You start with the front 2 channels, but if you gentlemen
disagree, I think without a
subwoofer,
it doesn't really feel much like a home theater.
I completely agree. And if you guys have no disagreements, we can move on to the calibration question, because I think that was very well said by you, Gary.
One point: if you do bookshelves up front to start, you can eventually move them to your rear.
That's right.
Fair point.
Too. So we see a lot of people do that, and that's really a great way to start.
This is a fun hobby to just start and then build on. You don't have to feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars in the beginning. I totally recommend just start with something fun, and you can build on it. And we're really good. I don't want to get too much into brand recommendations, but the team is really good at helping with stuff that we don't sell. So you can always feel free to reach out to us and get some recommendations on what could work for you that has nothing to do with what we sell.
Exactly. And so back to the topic of calibration. After you've done the calibration, your work isn't always done at that point. And there's a lot of settings that you can tweak to get the sound as good as it can. And Ed, I want to kick this one to you. Is there something you look at first as soon as calibration is done in terms of what you're going to adjust? And I have some softballs I can throw to you, but I want to hear your personal opinion of where you go first after that calibration is done, and then we can meander to different places.
The first thing we look for is if the receiver set any of the speaker channels to large. Large means that channel gets a full range signal, and that's generally not optimal because we want the subwoofer to help out for those channels. If we change the channel to small, it allows us to assign a crossover to that channel and direct some of that bass to the subwoofer. So that's the first thing we look for after setup runs, because it is common to see large or full range come back on some channels.
And Larry, this is a hot button topic for you. I think you get frustrated because the different receiver manufacturers have different terms they use, and the way they set them is not, sort of in unison. Share some thoughts on that, if you would, please.
Yeah, there's some brands, like we tend to recommend or use a couple different brands at our events whenever we do them. And it's because of the consistency between products that offer Odyssey. They tend to recognize things similarly, whether it's an entry-level product or top of the line. But we always go back in, like Ed was just saying, change the speakers from large to small so that we get a little bit more range across the board. Every speaker shares in every aspect of sound, pulling crossovers down to kind of blend a little bit better across the board, making sure that the levels are set. And I think one of the big ones that a lot of us run into, and I know Ed's team gets this on calls a lot, is after you run Odyssey, the subwoofer is not doing much. So I think we'll delve into that as well. And it's making sure that you've pulled the level back up on the subwoofer after the receiver down.
So I think that's a great point. Can I just sort of frame it up just slightly differently? When you're doing this receiver setup, it's going to make you turn your subwoofer to a certain output. It will argue with you if you try to set it the way you want to set it. So best to listen to what the receiver tells you. It's listening to your subwoofer. You do what the receiver says. But then when you're done with Odyssey, I think it's totally fine to turn your subwoofer up a few dB. Like I typically will do 3 or 4 dB higher output. I don't think, and I'm not trying to dominate the system with the subwoofer, but people like to hear the bass.
No question about it.
It's very common to go 3-4 dB louder than the setup, and the reason we look at speaker size first is we want to make sure the subwoofer is actually getting bass in the first place, and then when we're sure that it's getting all the bass, then we can tweak the subwoofer level to get it to where we like it subjectively. So
you covered the subwoofer level. I think there's also crossover settings that you can adjust as well. Ed, is there sort of a philosophy there that you follow post-calibration in terms of setting that crossover?
There is. Once you set the channel to small, it allows you to set a crossover. And if you have a good subwoofer in the system, we tend to stay away from a really deep crossover for any speaker channel because the subwoofer is simply better at doing bass than the speaker is at that point. So I like for fairly large speakers like towers or a big center channel, maybe 60 hertz crossover is good. Medium-sized speakers with smaller woofers, 80 hertz to 100 hertz. And then if you're running really small speakers, sometimes you'll see those come back at maybe 100 or 120, and that's fine. So usually between 60 and 120, depending on the size of the speaker, is where we like to be for crossovers.
Anything to add to that, Larry?
Well, you've got the subwoofer crossover that'll come into play too after you've made those adjustments. And where a lot of people make mistakes is actually adjusting the crossover on the subwoofer while the receiver has typically already done it for your home theater. So on your receiver,
that's a great point. Yeah, this is a mistake people make.
Yeah. And
so let's can I say a slightly different way?
Sure.
There should be no, if you're using a home theater receiver, the home theater receiver has specific output designed for a subwoofer. And for that reason, you do not need to set anything up in the subwoofer as far as the what's called the low pass filter, the slope, none of that. Just turn it off. On SVS subwoofers, you have an app where you can turn it all off. You can disable the low pass filter because you don't need it, because the receiver is sending the subwoofer exactly what it needs to reproduce. You would not want to filter that.
Right.
So Ed, any other tips you want to give about adjusting the subwoofer output or settings, once your calibration is done, or you think we covered most of the problems you confront on a regular basis?
One more thing, we get a pretty common question about under the bass menu. There's something called the LPF for LFE, and that's confusing for a lot of people. They're like, what is that? Is it the subwoofer crossover? What it is it's the low pass for the LFE channel, which is the 0.1 channel on the soundtrack. Generally, we recommend leaving that at 120 hertz because that's where the default is for the receiver. It doesn't affect the speaker subwoofer crossover frequency for any of the speaker channels. It strictly affects the LFE channel. And
so
just
that's a setting. That's a setting for in the receiver, right, Ed?
Yep, it's under bass. It's a separate setting, and it's confusing. We get that question all the time. What is this, and what do I set it to?
And what does LFE stand for, just so everybody understands?
Low frequency effects. It's the 0.1 channel in the soundtrack. It's reserved for low frequency effects. It's only
the LFE channel is designed by the producer of the content. They are saying, here's what we want your subwoofer to do in this movie or in this concert video. So all you want is to have it pristinely go to your subwoofer and let your subwoofer reproduce it.
Great info. And I think we are ready for another giveaway. We're almost halfway through here. And this time we will be giving away our SB1000 subwoofer, compact dynamite subwoofer right there. Our winner is coming from Facebook, Mr. Eugene Price. Congratulations, Eugene.
Yay, Eugene.
Reaching out to you. And you'll be bringing a subwoofer, and you can try all those tips and tricks we just shared with you to get it sounding as good as possible in your listening room. So let's shift gears from subwoofers a little bit and talk some more about some of the AV receiver settings. And, we were debating yesterday and talking about some of those various surround sound modes that you find. There's like Dolby Logic, there's some DTS ones. There's all these different terms that I think people get confused about what they mean and which one sounds the best. Ed, maybe you can just explain what they are first, not each one individually, but why they exist, and then we can talk a little bit about their purpose.
Well, there are sound modes that affect the quality of the sound, and generally I don't like using them, except there's one exception that we're going to talk about that Gary and I discussed yesterday. But usually I set the receiver to auto decode because most of the sources I'm watching or listening to are Dolby Digital, and Dolby Digital in, Dolby Digital out. I don't like noodling around or messing with the sound quality of the presentation. However, if you're watching a source that has 2-channel stereo, and some do, like Hulu, for example, I've got a Hulu subscription, all that stuff comes in 2-channel. If you leave the receiver in auto decode mode, you're going to be listening to stereo. That would be a good
opportunity. Even some receivers without the subwoofer.
Right. And that would be a good opportunity to basically force the receiver to convert that 2-channel stereo into quasi surround sound. So I would tell it convert this to Dolby Surround.
So I think the point would be that you're watching Hulu for example, or HBO Max. You're watching a movie or a TV show that actually is in surround sound, but for whatever reason the streaming service is sending it to your receiver in stereo.
Right.
So typically there's a code word on your receiver. It'll be movie mode or what other words do they I mean, everyone calls it something different.
Their DSP.
Movie, right. Cinema, something like that.
What that does, if you use that mode, is it will restore the surround sound and the bass to the content as best it can from the 2-channel signal. So It's just going to sound a lot more like a home theater experience.
Larry, anything to add on to that?
Well, you got to think there's also a lot of older content that doesn't have Atmos or DTSX added into it. So you do have the Atmos expansion or DTSX virtual, and sometimes it does a really good job. A lot of you have seen a demo that we've done either in person or virtually when we do. One of my favorites to do at the events is the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And that movie is old, and it sounds phenomenal whenever we do the upmix to Atmos. And so there are some experiences that can get better by playing with that. But I, like everybody else, tend to leave it on auto or do just an expansion whenever I'm listening to 2-channel.
Well, Larry, I think you're right. On things that are either, in my opinion, either Dolby True HD, which is not an Atmos format, or DTS, I believe it's called HD.
HD Master.
HD Master, right.
Yep.
If it's one of those two, those are really high-end, great-sounding formats, but they don't include hide effects. However, especially the DTS one, if you use that, Ed, I forget what it's called.
Neuralex. DTS Neuralex.
It will actually create hide effects out of something that doesn't have it, and it's very convincing. I'm a big believer in that.
And it does
Jumping
it for
ahead to
the
one of
Dolby Digital tracks too. If DD 5.1's coming in, it up converts to Dolby Surround, and you get the height effects. My receiver is default to do that. So like if I'm watching Netflix or Amazon Prime and it's a regular 5.1 feed, it says 5.1 plus Dolby Surround, and I get full 11 channels in my home theater. So it's definitely the way to go.
You're stealing thunder from one of the later topics we're going to address, but since we've sort of already jumped into it, there was a great question. What about Dolby Atmos and DTSX and adding height effects? Do any receivers up convert so you don't have to update and buy your whole Blu-ray collection again? I think you guys sort of got into it, but is there rules of some do, some don't? What's the deal? What do you know about that, Larry? That one's for you.
If you buy any receiver in the last 5-6 years that has Atmos or DTSX, you're going to be okay for your Blu-ray movies, your streaming and all that stuff. What you might run into would maybe be some HDMI issues if it's an older product with 4K and 8K. But if you have the 7 speakers to do Atmos and you're giving it Atmos content or watching something that's not, pretty much every receiver from whether it's Denon, Marantz, Onkyo, Pioneer, Integra, you name it, they all have an auto version of Atmos and DTSX, whether it's virtualization or Neural X or whatever. So you'll be able to experience it even if the content is not.
Good information. I think that's something a lot of people don't understand, and there's no reason to go out and spend more money buying content you already own when you can buy a receiver that's going to up convert it for you.
Right.
So it's not just the receivers that have settings and sort of sound things that you can tweak. It's also the components that you're connecting to them, and I think there's quite a bit of confusion out there about what's going to sound best. So Ed, I'm going to kick this one to you first. But basically, when you're connecting, say, a Blu-ray player or a cable box to your receiver, what do you need to know about those audio settings that are on those separate components, and what you should do to make it sound as good as possible?
A lot of these devices from the manufacturer are set up to bitstream or to send 2-channel PCM to the receiver, so they come over in stereo mode.
Why do they do that, Ed? Let's help people understand why is it set up. I mean, basically, what you're saying is, when you buy certain devices like a Blu-ray, even if it's a Dolby Atmos capable 4K Blu-ray, or a streamer like a Apple TV or a
Roku or something,
Roku or a Fire Stick, they're often not set up to actually do surround sound. And why is that?
The reason why is most of them are connected to TVs, and they want it to work when you connect it to a TV, and the TV can accept 2-channel PCM, and you're going to get sound out of it. Otherwise, you'd be calling their tech support and saying, "Hey, why is?" Or
you just return it. You think it was broken.
Right. So that's why they're set up for 2-channel PCM. So you want to go into the audio settings menu and set it up for what's called bitstream. So when it bitstreams the signal, it gets to the AV receiver, and then the AV receiver will decode it and convert it to Dolby Digital or DTS or whatever the source is. So then you'll get full surround sound from that particular streaming or device or Blu-ray player.
And you can do that with pretty much any streaming device, smart TV, but you have to go in there and tell it. And I'm going to tell you, Larry and I especially go to lots and lots of retail stores and where they have a lot of help. Yeah. And I always, when we tell them this, I feel like they're hearing it for the first time. So there's a lot of quote unquote experts out there that don't know this. And the sad fact is people are buying all this Dolby Atmos or surround sound capable equipment, and then they think they're listening to surround sound, but they're really not, because the device is not set up to do it.
Yeah, it's one of my biggest pet peeves when we go into stores. You set up a Blu-ray player, and up until just recently this year, almost every Blu-ray or 4K player that came out would default to PCM as opposed to bitstream. So if you haven't, get into your audio settings on your Blu-ray player, and you'll see that. Switch it to bitstream, and boom, there's Atmos. Because without it, you don't get Atmos. You'll get Dolby Digital and DTS, but you won't get the extreme multi-channel experiences. Whether you're on a game system or a computer or any of that, that's really what changes over HDMI. And I think that's another confusing bit for people is if you're using an optical connection, you're not going to get Atmos either. It's got to be over your HDMI cable.
Oh, that's a great point. So when you say an optical connection, you mean like sometimes these Blu-rays and some other devices literally come with a fiber optic cable, but they don't come with an HDMI cable. So the thing you would, might be inclined to do is I don't want to buy an HDMI cable. I'll just use the fiber that comes with it. But then you lose the full surround sound. You just get 2 channels. So don't do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that hook up their gear directly to their TV and just run an optical cable out to their receiver, or maybe if they do have a sound bar that way, and you're never going to get the enhanced audio that way. So
that's a mistake.
Yeah,
that's a great point. Great point, Larry.
Run
just
everything.
When in doubt, let's make a little rhyme here. When in doubt, use HDMI. That doesn't rhyme, but it's true.
Yeah, run everything through your AV receiver first.
You can get lip sync errors too if you're doing HDMI to the video device and like optical or digital coax to the receiver. You can get lip sync errors. It's best to have HDMI go to the receiver and then video back out to the television or video display.
So the person who asked about PCM uncompressed,
yes.
Basically, I'm not 100% familiar with that Xbox One, but if that's their best way of outputting, and you go look at your choices, and maybe Larry, you know this.
Oh yeah.
If that's their best way of outputting, it's fine. It'll be full uncompressed 7.1 signal. That's great. Typically the device is dumbed down to 2 channel, which is not so great.
Yeah, and if you have an Xbox, there's a Dolby app you can download that's free, and you'll be able to get Dolby Atmos on your games and on your 4K movies and Blu-ray discs too.
Some of the legacy gaming consoles cannot bitstream. That's a known problem, and we have our article on the website about that. You can research our article for setting up a gaming console. If it is unable to bitstream, then just send out uncompressed PCM, and it'll sound great.
Here's a geek question for you, Ed. Why does my LFE channel sound quieter when using PCM 7.1 versus bitstream? Too in the weeds?
It should.
Too in the weeds.
It should not. The encoding level should be exactly the same, whether it's PCM or bitstream.
So, but I would say this, because I know I haven't looked at all the comments are flying by and they're great questions, but I know, like the question that you often get is, what's better, DTS or Dolby Atmos, and the actual reality is some receivers do a better job with one versus the other, and some content sounds better with one versus the other. So I'd love to tell you, well, if you can get Dolby Atmos, that's the way to go, but there's no really perfect answer to that, other than I would use the highest resolution format that the device has. So if you're streaming, if you have the ability to do Atmos, which I haven't seen any streaming DTS HD or DTS X.
No,
so if you're stream in Dolby Atmos if you can. My new Fire TV stick can stream in Dolby Atmos. Yeah. If you are using a Blu-ray, use either DTS:X or Dolby Atmos. I guarantee you the Blu-ray disc will not have both. It will have one or the other.
Right.
Use the highest resolution format.
Yeah. And I see another question coming through that kind of goes to where we were talking earlier. So if you get into, in particular, Blu-ray players, if you get into the settings and adjust it to bitstream, you're going to see all these other settings about the picture-in-picture audio or downsampling and stuff. Turn all that stuff off too, because that tends to sometimes disable the Atmos and DTS:X. So I go in and I turn bitstream on and I turn off all that other stuff just so that everything works right.
Yeah, even the secondary audio commentary can sometimes disable the bitstream function on Sony's in particular. I've seen that.
And it's not just components that have these audio settings. It's the Blu-ray disc themselves sometimes. And there was an interesting question about, is there a setting within the Blu-ray that sounds best, and will your receiver automatically choose that one? And Larry, I know we deal with this at trade shows sometimes when we're setting up our system, making sure it's on the right setting. So what knowledge can you share about that?
So not every movie automatically defaults to the best sound. So I only buy physical content, and then we stream whatever the digital copy is that comes with it. But on a disc, the studio will automatically start off, kind of like we talked about earlier, with whatever's compatible with everything. So it will typically default to Dolby Digital. So if you put in a movie like from Warner Brothers, like the DC movies, or something from Disney, you typically have to choose the enhanced audio soundtrack, whether it's the Dolby Atmos or DTS:X. So like Ready Player One is a demo we do a lot. We always, always, always have to choose Dolby Atmos before we start the movie. Otherwise, you don't get the Dolby Atmos sound. So if you choose that in the menu of the physical disc itself, like the movie, when you put it in there, that's something I always check by default. I always put the movie in and go to the audio play.
Here's a tip, because not all of us are as detail oriented as Larry. When we're sticking in a disc, we just want to have a nice time, right? Here's my tip. Hit the display button on your TV remote, and it's going to tell you what is being, or I should say on your receiver remote, and it's going to tell you what you're listening to. So if you see that it's 2-channel, you don't have to sit there and go, I don't know if I hear surround sound. Hit that display button. It will tell you if you're hearing the full-on Dolby Atmos, and if you're not, then you just hit the audio button on the Blu-ray remote, and it will toggle to the different surround sound formats, and you pick the one that's the highest res.
Great advice. That's a good tip, sort of easy hack to get the information quickly as you need it.
Without having to start all over again.
Exactly.
I guess my point.
So I got to throw some props to somebody who's watched a couple of our Audiophile happy hours, Ed Osborne. He sent a bunch of great questions about AV receivers, and one of them is sort of a post-calibration question, so I wanted to throw it out there. My AV receiver's DSP calculated listener-to-speaker distances don't match the actual measured distances. Why not? Should I manually change the AVR's distances or match the actual ones? And Ed, I think this is a good one for you if you can get us kicked started on this.
Sure. Normally you see this issue with the subwoofer, and the reason why is the subwoofer has some DSP latency, and all that means in layman's terms is there's a slight delay for the microprocessor to process the signal. And that's usually just a couple milliseconds. So say the subwoofer is 10 feet away, it might come back at 13 feet after you run auto setup, and you're kind of scratching your head saying, why is that? It's just the DSP latency in there, and it's better to leave it where the receiver sets it, because that's a true time alignment. And don't set it to actual, leave it where the receiver set it.
I will say one exception, I think, and Ed, if you think I'm wrong, you can shout me down and tell me I'm wrong. I have found that, for example, in my center listening position, I'm sitting, I know it, equal distance from the left front speaker, the right front speaker, the center channel, because it's in the center, is slightly closer, and yet I'm seeing the receiver is completely mistaken about those things. In that scenario, I actually will go in and correct it. Where I won't necessarily correct it is in the effects speakers, because sometimes those are, because of different places in the room where they are, there are reflections and things going on that the receiver is going to do a better job figuring out what to do than maybe my intuition is. But in the front, it should be right. And if it's not, I think it's okay to fix it. Do you agree, Ed? If you don't, go ahead and say so.
No, I do. If you see an obvious discrepancy in one of the passive speaker channels, it's usually room acoustics, and it has fooled the auto setup system in the AV receiver. Right. So in situations like that, it's okay to make the correction. I don't make the correction on the subwoofer channels simply because of the DSP latency, but we do see bizarre results sometimes where the front left comes back at 20 feet and it's only 10 feet away. So that's just room acoustics. So it's okay to fix that.
Is there ever a scenario where you'd want to rerun calibration, maybe at more listening points to correct for that, since it could be a room anomaly?
Yes.
Sure.
It can sometimes be worth the trouble to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I do our events twice. Almost always, if we're doing our events, I do most of those rooms twice. But we're not in living rooms for those setups. We're typically in a show floor at a very big retail store. So I normally run Odyssey twice just to be safe.
I agree with that. And you know, if it's telling me things that I know are not true, like it thinks my speakers don't have any bass or this or that, Ed's right. Ed has helped me understand you don't want to just go in there and correct what the receiver thinks, because it's gonna divert sound to the speakers when it would be better to divert the sound to the subwoofer. So you don't necessarily want to go in there and argue with your receiver, but if you really feel that it's making incorrect judgments, then go ahead and you can move the speakers like a half an inch sometimes, and then rerun it, and you might get not completely different, but different enough results that you feel better about them. And the last thing I was going to say, Larry and I have probably 8 or 10 demos that we bring everywhere we go, and we know what they sound like. and we spend time listening to those demos to say to ourselves, yes, this home theater is calibrated properly. And Ken and I do the same thing with 2-channel, and same thing. We have 10 or 12 2-channel demos that we listen to together, and we talk about what we're hearing to make sure that it's set up perfectly. And I would recommend to everyone listening, pick some things that you love how they sound and you know how they should sound, and use those as your go-to way to understand if your home theater is set up properly.
So I'm going to switch subjects here a little bit. I think we kind of addressed this earlier on, but I don't think we really got into the why of it. And it's, after running the calibration, the subwoofer output is too low. And if you want more bass, should you raise the level within the subwoofer's volume control or the AV receiver's trim control, and why? And Ed, you want to kick us off on that one?
If you want to be really precise and know exactly how much you added to the subwoofer channel, then naturally you're going to want to do it in the receiver, because you can say, okay, I increased it, 2.5 dB or whatever. It's kind of hard to do that if your subwoofer has a rotary gain control on the back. A lot of the SVS products now have a digital control, so it really doesn't matter at that point. You can use it at the sub or at the receiver. But if you have a rotary gain control, it's okay to add it back there, but you're not sure exactly how much you added.
Yeah.
I always do it from the subwoofer, Ed. Yeah. I always find it to be easier. It's right there in front of me. All our subwoofers now have really clear, good clarity of how much you've turned it up. So for me, that's my way.
Yeah. For our subs, I usually add it at the subwoofer.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a two-parter, and part of that is because whenever you do run a room calibration, like Gary was talking about earlier, if you're doing an Odyssey system, there's typically a level matching to your subwoofer, and so you typically have to pull the subwoofer down to
way
get it
down
with all the other speakers. I have my subwoofer when I do room calibration everywhere we go, typically about half volume on the physical subwoofer, and so I go back after the room calibration, and it still recognizes the subwoofer as very negative. So in the receiver, I pull that up, and on the subwoofer, but that I don't do that in every sense. But if you've had to turn your sub down quite a bit to do your room calibration, then you will definitely probably pull both up just a little bit.
Yeah. I just saw a great comment, and then we should do a giveaway. But I really want to speak to this comment from Easy Now Bud, who says, I don't have an SVS sub yet, but it looks complicated, all those buttons and a remote. Let me say, because I actually, not to sell an SVS sub, but the reason I'm going to say this, and Ed, agree or disagree with me. Larry, I know you and I agree because we've done this together so many times. Have your subwoofer set where there's no adjustments made whatsoever other than volume.
Right.
And then all that other stuff that you can do with our subwoofers, you do that to solve problems. You don't just, you don't have to dive into the menus unless you just enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
So, my recommendation is, if you don't want to mess with all those granular adjustments that you can do with our smartphone subwoofer control app, don't do it. Just adjust the volume up and down and use the presets.
I agree 100%. Adjust the gain so the receiver can trim out the subwoofer where it needs to be level matched, and then only start digging into do a deep dive in the menu if you want to noodle around with EQ or room gain comp or whatever.
I'm going to throw this comment in here just because, I love anyone who's considering dual PB16 Ultras, but it's not AV receiver related. But
we get that one a lot, actually.
You know better than anybody.
The short answer is you'll be fine. And the reason why is the amplifier and the subwoofer is not a continuous draw device. It's not pulling 1,500 watts from the line all the time, like a vacuum cleaner or a space heater or an air compressor or something like that, salon hair dryer. All those are continuous draw devices. So the subwoofer is going to pull peak power for very brief periods of time and then go back to a lower demand. So you'll be fine with a 15 or 20 amp breaker, even with dual PB16s.
Good
and
info.
The 16 Ultra and 4000 series have built-in voltage regulators to deal with voltage fluctuations. So our biggest subwoofers are geared up to make sure that even if you're in an area with, for whatever reason, you don't have great reliable power in your outlets, our subwoofers deal with that.
Right.
I owe the people a giveaway. We're a little overdue, and the next giveaway we'll be doing, as Larry mentioned off the top, is our Prime Wireless Sound Base, which is quickly becoming one of our most popular products. 300 watt, 2-channel wireless integrated amp with all sorts of fun connections and control options. We are pulling from Facebook. Mr. TJ Reyes from Facebook. Our man Vince will be reaching out to you. Congratulations. You will have a Prime Wireless Sound Base within the next couple of days here.
Congratulations, TJ.
All right. Well, I think we have a few more topics we want to cover here as far as the AV receiver topic goes. And, I think this next one is something that a lot of people can appreciate. And it has to do with the dialogue and sort of center channel. And when you set the calibration and you can't hear dialogue in movies clearly, do you raise the center channel level? Do you do it with the AVR's volume control feature or the volume EQ? What's the best way to hear movies and TV better? And Larry, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
That's kind of a big question. I would tell you what we run into with a lot of people is there's a lot of people that start with a speaker that may not be capable of what they're trying to do as well. So our center channel speakers, if I could say that properly, are all 3-way center channels. And when you have a 3-way center channel, you automatically get more range, more capability, more flexibility listening to. So we have a lot of people like, oh, I really can't hear what they're saying or singing whenever they're watching. It's typically because they're using a 2-way center channel. And we won't dive into that. We've done that previously. But
it does a thing called lobing, which means only someone directly in front of it is going to get the full clarity. Right. Whereas a 3-way center channel that has the tweeter and the mid-range above vertically oriented will not lobe, and so anywhere you're sitting in the room, you'll hear the dialogue with clarity.
Yes, and we do a great demo with that in our trainings. We do The Greatest Showman. There's a singing track right in the middle that Nick and I know very well. But
sing it for you, but I won't.
No, we're not going to burden you guys with our voices tonight.
But can I give one tip that doesn't cost anything that I think a lot of people don't realize? Center channels are often mounted in the TV's cabinet, and they're pushed back in the cabinet, and speakers need to have nothing to the side of them. So what you want to do is pull that center channel out as far on the edge of the shelf towards your listening position as you can. And that can make a dramatic difference in the clarity of the speaker, no matter what speaker you're using. And that's free.
Yeah, don't put it in a cabinet like you're saying. So there's a lot of furniture out there now that wants your center channel inside that cabinet. It's going to echo and kind of bellow in there. But I think most people probably pull up the channel level on a center channel because it is outside the subwoofer the most important speaker in your system because that's where all your dialogue is coming from.
I do mine about 1 dB over the level match, maybe 1.5 dB at the most. If you go much higher than that, it starts to imbalance the presentation and dominate. But I do like it a little bit louder than where the auto setup sets it.
Same.
And since we were mentioning center channel placement tips, if you do have to put it or choose to put it in a piece of furniture and you have it below ear level, those little they have mounts that allow you to angle it upwards, so you can at least have that tweeter, angled towards your ears if it's below ear level. Have the tweeter sort of shooting upwards, so it's hitting that main listening position right around where your ears are. So staying similarly on that topic, Ed, I wanted to ask a question about when you do choose to turn it up to get that dialogue sounding a lot better. Some AV receivers will have what's called like a dynamic range limiter, something like that. Do you ever use those? Is there a circumstance where that actually makes sense, or what's your opinion on those?
Yeah, this used to be called midnight mode, and there's now it's called dynamic volume and Denon and Marantz. What it does is it compresses the dynamic range of the presentation. And the only time it's useful is if you're listening late at night and you want to turn it up so you hear the dialogue clearly, and then maybe there's an explosion and it's like 40 dB louder and it blows everybody out of the house and people start shouting at you. If you turn on the dynamic compression, and usually there's 3 settings, like low, medium, and high. If you set it to high, pretty much everything's going to play at the same volume. So you won't upset people in the house. Dialogue and explosions will sound pretty much at the same volume. Now, naturally, you're robbing the presentation of dynamics, which makes it a lot of fun. So you want to turn that back off when you're doing the normal listening.
Yeah, that's important, I think. You definitely want to turn that off when you're, because it really makes it much more boring to
It's
experience movies.
Point of
really
having the
boring.
system.
It has
Exactly.
its place, but I only use it or only recommend it in those situations, and usually I turn it off.
And there's another option as well, which is the one that we used to call the loudness control. What's it called now, Ed or Larry? Odyssey gives you two options. One is that one, and then the other one. The other one basically, when you're listening very, very quietly, it exaggerates the extreme low frequencies and high frequencies. Can't remember what they call it, but
dynamic EQ.
That's
what
it.
It's called. Yeah.
I'm also not a fan of that, but I understand if you're turning it way down in volume, just remember to turn it off after you finish doing it.
So I think we have time for one more topic, and Gary, I want to make sure we frame this one up correctly, but I think it is an important one, and that's the power ratings and AV receivers and what people should know in terms of when they're setting up their system. What's important, like how much power do you need? Is there sort of a general frame up you can give people to, help them when they're looking at different receivers in terms of how much power they need for various kinds of systems?
Well, we actually were kicking this around in our pre-call because I wanted to make sure everybody agrees with me. I would say that one of the most overrated things people talk about in a receiver is the power rating, because I've been doing this a really long time with thousands and thousands of home theaters under my belt, and Ed and Larry can say the same. And I can count on one hand the number of times the speakers were totally mismatched to the receiver. It rarely happens. So the reason you get a higher output, higher performing receiver is so that it can be effortless with the speakers, but especially since it'll have more refinement, more accuracy, and it'll be therefore more convincing and immersive. Those are the reasons to do it. Just for everybody to understand, 3 dB is it's a measurement of volume. A 3 dB increase is the first increase in loudness that people can raise their hand and say, "Oh, I noticed that." And it takes double the power to create a 3 dB increase in the loudness of a speaker. So the power of the amplifier is less important than the performance of the speakers themselves. And Ed and Larry, if you guys want to disagree with me, that's fine.
The only time I recommend going to a bigger power receiver or external amplification, if you have a big room, you're far away from the speakers, your playback level is high, then you might start running into a situation where the receiver is starting to gas out a little bit, especially if you're running 9 channels or 11 channels and the receivers just can't do it. Then step up to a more powerful receiver or add an external amplifier, and you can get the dynamics back that you need.
Great info. So before we wrap up, I think I saw so many questions come by that we didn't get to address. We might have to do a part 2 for this one. I don't know what you guys think.
This might be the most comments I've seen.
Yeah, there's a lot of hunger for knowledge when it comes to this topic. And Ed, I just realized I didn't ask you off the top. We're going to do it at the end. What are you drinking, my friend?
Oh, Larceny bourbon.
Very good. Well, I went with the West Coast shout out, have my gin and juice here. So we'll be finishing these off after the broadcast wraps up here. But I'm
drinking Crystal Light.
Crystal Light. Very exciting, Larry.
Slow down, right, Gary? Weren't you drinking some kind of
yeah, I was drinking my Chinese tea.
He has high test tea that gets him fired up for our calls, and we always appreciate that. So we do have one giveaway, and I know a lot of people have been anticipating the giveaway of our PB2000 Pro subwoofer, which I have to throw a plug out there. Audiophile just posted a review of it. So if you want to learn a lot about it, they do deep dives, measurements, all sorts of good stuff. So show them some love, read that review. But I know most of you just want to know who won. And our winner is coming from Facebook, Mr. James Clark. James Clark, you have a PB2000
Congratulations.
Coming your way, so you can play around with your AV receiver, getting that all set up. Vince will be reaching out to you here shortly. So we're going to be back.
Let me ask before you hang up on them. Let me ask: was this a helpful thing? Is this the kind of show you guys want from us, where we're diving deep into this type of information to help you have the best sounding home theater? Is this the best version of our show, or something different?
And I think mixing it up too.
Yeah.
What was that, Larry?
we didn't go into the woods either. I think we answered the most basic questions that we get to come across to us as well. So I think a lot of you probably got something out of this. And I saw a lot of comments like, man, I've had this system for years and I just went and made that change. So it was cool to see that too.
The last question that a lot of people are asking is, why is Ed's room so dark?
It's getting darker.
You know why? I'm using natural light, and when we started, the sun was out, and I'm Eastern time frame, and I'm looking outside. It's pretty dusk at this point, so that's
Looks
why
like one of those night battles on Game of Thrones. I have no
Yeah,
idea what's
my
going on.
my light's starting to fade at this point because they say natural lighting looks the best. So
It certainly
makes
doesn't
you so
match your
pretty,
mood,
Ed.
though. Been a bright spot for this broadcast. We appreciate your time, Ed, and I
Always a
don't
pleasure.
doubt we will have you back again for part 2 of this. So just to reiterate, next happy hour is coming up October 15th. It's a Thursday. It's going to be 6 p.m., just like all of them. So we'll get
Eastern
all the
time.
information out there. Maybe we'll do more tips on AV receivers. Maybe we'll mix it up. You'll have to wait and see. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Appreciate your time as always.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
everybody.
guys. This was fun.